Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
We are diving into the life of Reverend Sun Myung Moon, a figure whose life is just full of these wild, almost unbelievable contradictions.
It really is. On one hand, you have his followers, millions of them, who see him as this visionary, a spiritual leader chosen by God.
For humanity's salvation, no less.
Right. And then on the other side, you have the critics.
And they saw a very different picture, a self-proclaimed messiah who, used his religious authority to build up immense global power, wealth, and a lot of political influence.
Our mission today is really to trace that story for you, that almost movie-like story. We're going to follow Moon's narrative from his earliest years. I mean, we're talking rural poverty in Japanese-occupied Korea.
All the way to geopolitical activism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a worldwide movement he created. The goal is to see how his unique vision got so tangled up with the huge political and religious currents of the 20th century.
And our sources track every big step of this really complex life. We're looking at those early world-altering mystical experiences.
The trauma of war, which is so key.
And the literal crucible of a North Korean prison camp. And then finally, the creation of this global empire that just sparked.
Well, it sparked both intense, just unshakable devotion, and at the same time, deep, lasting criticism pretty much everywhere it went.
So let's start at the beginning, with the spiritual roots of his vision. Moon was born in 1920.
Right, in a small village, Seongsu-ri, which is now in North Korea.
And he's living this simple agrarian life, steeped in Confucian tradition. But it's all happening under the incredibly harsh reality of Japanese colonial rule.
That whole background changes, though, and it changes in a big way when he's about 10. His family converts to Presbyterian Christianity.
And you have to understand the context of that, right?
You absolutely do. Christianity in Korea at that time, it wasn't just a quiet Sunday faith. It was deeply political. It was all tied up with anti-colonial nationalism.
Modernizing impulse.
A huge modernizing impulse, and just this hope for liberation from Japan.
And what's so interesting is that even as a kid, Moon was known for being intensely devout.
Oh, yeah, just spending hours in deep solitary prayer. But he pretty quickly developed this sense of spiritual dissatisfaction. He felt that the strict Calvinist moralism being preached.
The doctrines coming from the West.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He felt they just hadn't fulfilled what he called God's original hope for humanity.
So a sense of incompleteness.
A radical sense of incompleteness. That something absolutely vital was missing from the faith he was being taught. And that feeling becomes the engine for everything that follows.
Which leads us directly to the single most defining moment of his entire life.
The Easter vision.
The Easter vision.
Yeah.
He said it happened when he was 16 in 1936. He's praying on a hillside, it's Easter morning, and he claims he has a literal physical vision of Jesus Christ.
And according to his own testimony, this wasn't just a blessing. Jesus didn't just appear to comfort him.
No, he gave him a job, a massive one. He asked Moon to complete the mission that was left unfinished at the crucifixion.
Which was?
To establish God's ideal of perfect love and, create a sinless humanity.
This one encounter, it wasn't just some powerful personal moment for him. It instantly became the foundational mythos for his entire mission.
His life becomes intertwined with cosmic history.
Totally. By accepting this task, he believed he was chosen for the role of true parent. And to really get the scale of his ambition, you have to understand what that title meant to him.
It's not just about spiritual reform.
Not at all. It meant he believed he was destined to establish the physical starting point of a brand new, sinless human lineage, something he believed Jesus failed to do.
And that idea just launches him into this intense, decade-long spiritual apprenticeship, fasting, prayer.
Years of it. Rigorous, solitary work to prepare.
Meanwhile, the world he was preparing for was just tearing itself apart. He goes to study electrical engineering in Japan.
And sees firsthand the state-sponsored repression, the whole racial hierarchy that treated Koreans as second-class subjects.
And then, 1945, the Japanese empire collapses. He returns to a Korea that's supposedly free, but is just sliding into total chaos.
And that spiritual intensity he'd built up, it made him unable to compromise with what was happening politically. He felt Korea had this special destiny.
But his ideas were already putting him at odds with the established Christian
Oh,
churches.
completely. So he moves north to Pyongyang, which ironically was known as the Jerusalem of the East for its Christian history.
But he immediately runs into trouble with the new communist regime.
Right, which was aggressively shutting down any and all religious activity it couldn't control.
This clash was it was bound to happen.
Inevitable.
He gets arrested in 1946 and then again in 1948.
And the charges are this weird mix. On one hand, it's doctrinal suspicion. His teachings were not Orthodox Christianity.
And on the other, he's seen as a political threat.
A direct threat to communist authority.
Yeah.
So he's sentenced to 5 years of hard labor in the Hungnam labor camp, just a notoriously brutal place.
Hungnam was, as you said, a crucible. The sources describe it as an absolutely brutal place.
Starvation, high death rate, grueling work producing ammonium sulfate fertilizer. It was a place designed to break the body and the spirit.
Moon's later descriptions, they frame his time there as the ultimate test of faith. His survival was seen as, well, miraculous by his followers.
And that survival becomes this central part of his story, his narrative.
A resurrection narrative.
Exactly. His followers framed his release, which happened in October 1950, during the chaos of the Korean War when UN forces bombed the area, as being like a biblical story of suffering and rebirth.
He was nearly dead from malnutrition when he fled south.
Trekking through the devastation until he got to Busan. And that experience, seeing that total destruction, it just reinforced his belief that humanity desperately needed a completely new spiritual start.
So in Busan, he starts over, preaching, gathering followers.
While living in a tiny shack he literally built from scrap materials and cardboard on a hillside.
And that little shack later becomes, in the movement's eyes, the symbolic birthplace of a new religious era.
It's incredible. And by 1954, he formally founds the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, or the HSAUWC,
The Unification Church.
based in Seoul. And here's where the theology gets really radical and where the conflict really begins.
The divine principle.
Divine principle, his core teaching. It's this elaborate reinterpretation of theology and really all of human history.
It argues that God's ultimate desire wasn't just spiritual righteousness, it was for ideal families.
Ideal families founded on perfect love. And here's the key claim, the nugget that set them apart from everyone.
Go on.
The claim was that Jesus only achieved spiritual salvation on the cross. He didn't complete the physical mission of establishing these ideal, sinless families on earth.
A failure, in his view.
A failure which, according to the divine principle, meant a new messianic figure had to come, the true parent, to finish the job.
You can imagine how that went over with mainstream Korean Christianity.
They saw it as outright heresy. It put him in direct existential conflict with them. But his movement grew, fueled by that conviction.
And then in 1960, he undertakes the holy marriage to Hak Ja-han.
And they saw this as much more than just a wedding. It symbolized the creation of this new, sinless lineage.
It was the prototype, really, for those massive, globally famous mass wedding ceremonies that came later.
Exactly. The blessing ceremonies.
So the 1970s arrive, and the movement shifts from being a Korean thing to a global force.
And it accelerates fast with a big push into the United States. Moon himself arrives in 1971.
And he starts giving these speeches predicting that America, despite all its problems, its cultural turmoil,
He had a divine mission to protect freedom and serve God's will on a global scale.
this rapid growth in the U.S., though, it led to immediate and really intense controversy.
Oh, huge controversy. Members lived communally. They dedicated their whole lives to the mission, fundraised like crazy.
And this brought on massive scrutiny, especially from parents of the young members. They started accusing the church of manipulative practices.
And this is where that loaded term, brainwashing, really enters the public conversation about new religious movements.
Describing that intense communal living, the isolation from family, the total commitment.
Right, but here's the essential question. If the mission was purely spiritual, why did the movement pour so much energy and money into politics and media? Wasn't that a worldly distraction?
That's a great question.
And the strategy was, well, brilliant if you find it controversial. Moon framed the entire Cold War, the great geopolitical struggle of the time, not as a political fight,
But as a spiritual battle.
a spiritual battle, between God-centered freedom and Satan-centered communism. By framing it that way, he kind of bypassed the traditional religious gatekeepers and got access to powerful conservative and anti-communist political figures in the West.
People who shared his ideological zeal.
They loved it.
And that political influence gets even deeper in 1982 when he founds the Washington Times.
And this wasn't a small side project. It was explicitly created as a conservative newspaper to counter what he saw as a liberal bias in the media, and it quickly became really influential in D.C. political circles.
But ironically, 1982 also brings his biggest legal fight.
The one that seems to directly contradict his claims of creating a sinless lineage. Moon was convicted of tax evasion and conspiracy.
Leading to an 18-month federal prison sentence.
The case was complex. It revolved around alleged mismanagement of church funds, assets held in his personal name, cross-border money transfers.
Wait, so the man preaching about sinless families and spiritual truth is convicted of a felony in the United States. How did his followers square that circle? How do you reconcile that with a messianic claim?
That tension, amazingly, became a source of strength for the movement, not weakness.
How?
Supporters immediately framed it as political and religious persecution. They said he was being targeted for his anti-communist influence and his success.
So he serves 13 months and his time in prison, just like his time in Hungnam.
It gets framed as a modern parallel to Christ's suffering for the world's sins. It deepened his image as a persecuted religious leader among his followers. It didn't diminish it.
Let's shift gears to the spectacle. I mean, maybe the most visually striking, globally famous part of the Unification Church. Those mass weddings.
The blessing ceremonies.
It's hard to even imagine. Tens of thousands of couples, often matched by Moon himself, all getting married at once. The scale is just staggering.
And these ceremonies are the perfect example of that dual perspective we talked about at the beginning.
Okay, break that down.
For supporters, these were not just weddings. They symbolized the creation of a new, unified world culture. They would deliberately pair couples from historically enemy nations.
Like Japan and Korea.
Japan and Korea, Israel, and Arab states. It was meant as a practical symbol of global reconciliation.
But for critics.
For critics, these massive organized events just cemented his reputation for exercising this extreme, unprecedented control over the most personal, most intimate parts of his followers' lives.
So in his later decades, Moon really branched out. He expanded his organizations way beyond just religion or politics.
Yeah, he built vast ventures in media, major business holdings, education, humanitarian projects like the Universal Peace Federation.
Yeah, his focus widened to things like oceanic enterprises, environmentalism, and maybe most passionately advocating for the unification of North and South Korea.
Right up until his death, that was a huge focus.
But the internal complexity of this empire he built, it seems like it started to catch up with him.
It did. After he died in 2012 at age 92, succession became a really critical and very messy issue.
The huge organizational structure, the wealth.
It all became a source of intense internal fighting. It led to these very clear divisions and factions among his widow, Hak Jae-han, two of his sons, and other longtime leaders.
So at the end of the day, what does this all mean? When you look back, Moon's life story is this powerful reflection of the intersection of what? Profound religion, high-stakes politics.
Intense personal charisma and just vast global ambition.
Even his detractors, people who fundamentally reject his theology, have to admit the sheer scale of his impact.
You have to. He helped shape Cold War political culture. He owned and influenced major media outlets. And he forged these global interfaith and business networks.
So the final takeaway is that you can't reduce his story to just one simple narrative.
You can't. It's a story of suffering in the crucible of war. It's a story of spiritual searching. But it's also a story of immense political ambition and incredible empire building. It shows how one powerful personal belief, born in a specific time and place, can be leveraged into a global structure that touches every continent.
We've covered a lot of ground pretty quickly here, from the intensity of that 1936 vision on a hillside,
Through the literal suffering of the Hungnam labor camp.
to the dramatic global expansion, powered by the divine principle and the spectacle of those mass weddings.
And finally, to the lasting controversy around his huge political and business interests.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's an important question to think about.
The scale of Moon's ambition connected personal spiritual salvation, the ideal family, directly to global political action and commerce. His theology didn't just suggest this. It required the building of a complex, wealthy, and politically engaged global organization to fulfill its mission. So the question is, what inherent challenges, both practical and spiritual, arise when a religious movement that's aiming for a sinless humanity fundamentally requires the building of that kind of massive worldly enterprise?
That is definitely something worth mulling over.